If you liked this episode of the Hockey IQ podcast, please leave a like, a comment, and especially review our podcast. If you truly listened all the way to the end and you're listening to this right now, you enjoyed this episode. Please go and give it a 5-star review. That helps us out more than you know. Thank you so much and look forward to the next one. On the Hockey IQ podcast today, we bring on Val Hannahs. Um, we'll keep it short, but registered dietitian with a bachelor in medical dietetics from the Ohio State University, which at this point we might as well just call the football playoffs, the Big Ten playoffs, with Michigan, Ohio State, and Indiana. So we know it's a great place to be. So welcome on to the show.
Thank you very much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Um, Obviously, being in Columbus, we already know you're above the rest. But I'm curious, kind of your journey into dietetics because you were volleyball and softball, and then made the not so dramatic turn into endurance sports.
Correct. Yeah, so grew up in Columbus, been here all my life. Went through Catholic grade school, heavy into sports. My dad, in particular, was a lifelong coach, coached up until he passed recently in 2021. And yeah, we in playing sports, that the kind of demand on that, I started to grow an interest in nutrition in high school. I had just changed a little bit of my own fueling, not knowing anything, and got really interested in it. So I knew going into college, that's exactly what I wanted to do. So I sought out to go to Ohio State because they have an excellent program that makes it really simple for you as a dietitian. Went through and yeah, just decided sports nutrition was what I wanted to do at that time. This was in 2006, so 20 years this year. An instructor told me, they don't have jobs, full-time jobs in sports nutrition. And I was like, well, that's what I want to do. So they put me in cardiac rehab. That was the closest they could get me. So I started out in clinical, never a bad place to start. You're going to learn everything and anything about the body and what it requires. And luckily, I had a professor who had her PhD in exercise science, and she pushed me. So she said, make them want you, make them realize that they need you. And so I just started doing that. She actually hooked me up with probably my first ever speaking gig was for like a track and field conference local in Columbus. And it just kind of stemmed from there. Absolutely love sports. I love each and every type of sport, any type of sport, always been fascinated with hockey and was pretty excited when my kids decided that they wanted to get into hockey. So it's a little bit about my journey. I
I-
went
I'm
back.
cu I'm curious with that journey though, like make them want you, make them realize they need you. I mean, what a dramatic piece of advice.
Yeah.
What did you actually do with that advice? Or like, what are some tools and tricks that you've learned along the way? Because I feel like that's so applicable as parents and also as coaches who are always trying to increase our influence and help people on their journey.
Yeah, yeah. So the first, I would say it came in layers for me. So that first layer would be just going out and reaching out to different organizations, folks like that. And just, I don't want to say, I hate to say cold call, but like in the early days, that's what it was, is like, hey, this is what I provide. This is what it can do. But really kind of pulling back the curtain and showing, hey, this is what's happening in youth sports. This is what we're seeing. Kids aren't able, like showing them the issues that they were having, um, so that they could see, oh, and start to think about, oh yeah, that does happen to me at time to time, or I see this with my athlete. So what I'm able to provide, what we're able to do, what research backs up with that. So that would be kind of that first layer, was really just getting me to just be like, okay, let's take this jump and be like, you don't know what you don't know until you don't know. Like, so until you get more information. And so a big piece of being a dietitian, of being a coach, of being a parent is it's educating. And sometimes, sometimes we aren't 100%, correct, or we have to go and look at resources. as parents, but like as a sports dietitian, I know my area, right? I know it very well. And I have experienced it myself. And so over the course of time, especially like becoming a parent, I have coached myself several different sports. Is being able to one listen to my athletes, hear what they're saying, and then I'm a very big proponent of asking them the questions back and helping them give them a little bit of education, right? This is what we're doing. This is why, the what and the why. But then to get them to the how, it's a lot of now, what do you think about this? Or let's say we're working with an athlete, it could even be my own kids, and we're trying to get them to work towards building a better breakfast or even just having breakfast. Uh, how do you think you're going to feel today if we don't have any breakfast, right? How's that going to feel for you? And letting them really start to develop like their response to that, like what's going to happen. So for coaches in particular, when I pitch to different groups, it's, you know, how many of you have seen your athletes just completely start to lose energy second, third period? Hands go up. How many of you have had athletes who cramp? Hands go up. You know, all of these things that can very easily be tweaked when athletes, one, have the knowledge and then have the know how of how to apply their nutrition. So it's kind of a roundabout way of different ways that I apply that. But for me, there's a lot of asking questions. What have they seen? And then what can I provide you answers for that can actually help, help solve this problem?
I love the style of like illuminate and then like just step back and then don't give a direct answer.
Mm-hmm.
Educate a little bit, but don't give a direct answer. I feel like it's a great way to get people to kind of chase you. It's like, okay, you're struggling with this, and just leave it at that. And then like you can start to see the wheels turn a little bit. So they're like, yeah, I do struggle with that. And then most of them come directly to you asking what to do.
Yeah.
And that's the challenge as us coaches and consultants, et cetera, is like you want to give the answer really bad. Like your instincts to give the answer, but that's usually not the right thing to do. It's like I call it like you need to invite ownership. So how do we get them to invite, how do we invite ownership in them? Like your question about how do you think you're going to feel if you skip breakfast type question, where it's becomes more investment on their part rather than just giving the answer and okay, we're on our way, and it's not becoming personal to the learner, whether it be the hockey player, the parent who's trying to get a better diet, whatever it may be. So I like that piece of like we're going to illuminate. We're going to invite some ownership by avoiding giving them what they want immediately, but really just guiding them down a path where it's going to stick. It's going to be personal and it's going to be way more effective in the long term.
Yeah.
All right. So you mentioned avoiding cramping. So how do you avoid cramping?
Uh, well, I with each and every player, it's always a little bit different. I mean, there's your basics, right? Of people first almost always turn to hydration, which yes, extremely important. I think something that is often missed is players will focus on really just putting it right around hockey. And say, well, I drank water before and I threw in some electrolytes or I did this during, but they're still having cramping. And so what that tells me is, well, we're still not hydrating well enough and we could still be underfueling. So carbohydrates actually play a major role in our hydration and helping us stay hydrated and really helping to facilitate get electrolytes into our cells where we want them to hold that fluid so that we can stay hydrated throughout. So hydration is an everyday 24/7 hours a day thing where we really need to make sure we're forming really good habits around that. So from the nutrition, because there's other things that we can do, right? If we can do stretching and we can massage our muscles and things like that in a moment. But it's having a good kind of hydration plan is what I really work towards with each player that I work with and what I teach in my nutrition sessions with athletes. It's starting when you first get up in the morning and beginning to identify for them what is something we can do in the morning, what's a habit stack that we can do, which is taking, something we're already doing and we can add some hydration to it, right? So if we're brushing our teeth, which we should, I would hope that they're all brushing their teeth. You never know, though. I always get a group of athletes who hands are not up when you ask this question. So, what's something that you do every morning? Okay, immediately after that, let's get some water in. Let's begin that process. And just forming really tiny things of getting them to consistently carry around a water bottle. People make fun of the security water bottles, but you know what? They work. They're very helpful. The other thing would be making sure we are getting some sodium and potassium, electrolytes on our performance plates, breakfast, lunch, dinner. Like that's the starting point of electrolytes. And I think people kind of overlook that and jump straight to electrolyte beverages and supplement type of add-ins around their sport, which can be very helpful. But for a lot of, especially my younger athletes, they don't necessarily need some of those supplemental things until maybe they're a little bit older, maybe their workload is a bit heavier. And so just putting some salt on a homemade meal with, carbohydrates, their complex carbs, their fruits and vegetables, which are key because that holds many of our electrolytes, potassium, magnesium, calcium, and then adding some salt to that. We're even getting potassium from our proteins that we're putting on our plate. And potassium and sodium are probably the two that we need the most, but really it's sodium. Like it's making sure we're getting enough sodium. So when we're in a kind of, I don't want to say diet culture, but we know that overall sodium, we don't want to have too much for the average person, but athletes have different needs. And I think that's the biggest thing is making sure that athletes understand their needs and they know how to sprinkle these things in throughout their day to create habits that are going to help prevent them from cramping. So two things that I would encourage is even if they don't have the rest of their nutrition in place, let's start maybe around hockey. That's a good place to start. And then we can pull it out to the rest of their day. So making sure we're getting in, 16 to 24 ounces of fluid a few hours before we hit the ice and making sure that we're having a high carb snack. It could come in the form of fruit. It could come in the form of pretzels, which is really nice because it's got the sodium on there. Some of my kids really love fruit snacks or, those types of things that are just quick and easy. The biggest and most important thing is that they are fueling and they are hydrating. So, and front loading that and then also after making sure that they're getting that that should be the first thing we do is start hydrating right after. So making sure we are having enough carbohydrate and enough hydration throughout the day.
All right. I like where we're heading with this. So maybe we just break this down into three segments. Um, so first one, we kind of have the before the game, like we're preparing for the event, whether it be a hockey game, your triathlon. What does it look like before the game? And then next, what we'll move into maybe between periods or during the event.
Yeah. Okay. So a very good basic framework for players is to get into what we call like a 4-2-1 kind of fueling plan. Now, this takes a while to get to, but like the ideal state is we want to make sure that players 3 to 4 hours before they hit the ice that they're getting in some sort of performance plate, which is like a regular meal, guys. It's complex carbohydrates, meaning whole grains, starches. So it could be potatoes. Sweet potatoes are really great. A lean protein. I tend towards things like chicken, fish on game day, like pre-hockey, just because we know that our body can break those down a little bit quicker than say like a big piece of red meat. But not that we can't, just need to make sure we give ourselves enough time. And then we want to have some color on the plate, especially game days. So you want like half that plate to be those complex carbohydrates, the grains and the starches, because that's the main source of fuel. This is kind of that initial step where if you think about the muscles are the gas tank, we are getting those to probably 3/4 of the way full with this meal. So we're filling up that tank. And then we want to add in a little bit of color. That's for our antioxidants, our electrolytes, and that can come in the form of fruit and or vegetables or a little bit of both. So that's 3 to 4 hours out. We also want to make sure we're getting hydration in. So that is going to be 16 to 24 ounces. It could be water. Some of my players will start to add in an electrolyte drink, something like that. If they don't use a lot of sodium in their diet, they might do that a couple hours before and they'll start. So it's a constant hydration process all the way up to game time. So when we get to about 1 to 2 hours out, we might be looking for a large snack. So if you eat something, if you eat that meal like 4 hours out, then a couple hours later, let's have a large snack. I call it a mini meal. It could be as simple as like making a peanut butter and jelly sandwich and having a banana with it. It could be having a smoothie, right? That's mixed with fruit, mainly higher carbohydrate items. So maybe a little bit of milk, some fruit, maybe a little bit of yogurt. And then mix that up. And that is going to help to kind of get that fuel tank just a little bit higher, maybe not quite, all the way full. And we're going to increase hydration. And then as we get closer to game time, some players can do a snack at an hour out, but most of them are doing about 30 minutes out. Like while we're in the locker room, while we're getting dressed, we continue that hydration process. And this, we are just topping off the tank. This is to make sure, right, we have that full energy so that when we hit the ice, we're not dipping into those reserves in our muscles and we're not just blowing through all of those glycogen stores. Hockey is a high intensity sport. And I have not played it, but I watch it all the time. And I've seen all different sports and I've worked with all different athletes. Hockey in and of itself is just one of the most demanding physically that I've worked with. And the players really deplete those stores down pretty quickly, especially if they are giving full effort. So that last like 30 minutes or so, we're looking at 30 grams of carbohydrate. So that could be, if we have a couple of tangerines, it could be an applesauce pack. Those are really great, quick resources to get that carbohydrate in and then give yourself a little more fluid.
So one of my favorite people is Mitch Korn. If there's a Hall of Fame for goalie coaches, he'd be on it. So he used to work with the Capitals, and there was like a behind the scenes video once where he had a player go through their normal hydration routine, but then like he got pulled, I think it was after like half a period.
Mhm.
So he went the next night and played the game, but he went through the whole hydration plan again. Uh, and that's when they discovered overhydration. He said he
Oh,
was like seeing stars and whatnot. So obviously, like the hydration plan is super important. Like they're clearly using this at the highest levels. Um, but then it comes to a point, it's like, oh, you didn't actually deplete any of that. You probably shouldn't add double the fluids while not absolutely using, very minimal the night prior. So I'm curious, uh, when do we go a little bit too far? Like I always think like, oh, if I ate way too much, I always felt like garbage. Like I can't move,
yeah,
that kind of stuff. Or like you drink too much fluid and now you're just like, I feel like I'm topsy turvy. I'm
yeah.
curious, what does that look like? You want to make sure you get enough, and it's probably better to overshoot than undershoot.
Yeah. So I think it starts with knowing where's the starting point. So in my program, that's exactly what we do with each and every individual player is like, where are we starting at? And it usually takes them like this ideal kind of plan. One, it either takes players quite a while to get to, or two, we really kind of baby step. So making sure that we are not only doing just fluid alone, right? That's when we have to look at like the electrolytes and that uptake because you can't just do water, especially in a sport like hockey. One thing that we do, I've done it with some of the high school teams that I've worked with, and I've done it with some of my individual athletes, and they do it. Let me see. I'm trying to think of a couple of my colleagues who, actually, one she works for Nashville, and the other one is for the Islanders, and just the sweat rate testing, and so making sure that we know each individual's sweat rate. It's very simple to find that out, but figuring out their sweat rate to figure out exactly how much they need, but making sure that like I said, it's throughout the whole day. So you really have to know if I lost X amount. If I lost, a pound after, then I really only need maybe 16, 24 ounces to replace that. And if we have a higher sweat rate loss that evening, then we need to make sure we're replacing that. I think the key is making sure that we're getting in the right amount, the right mix of both the fluid, but also those electrolytes. You'd really have to look at that individual's kind of plan, and where are we having too much of what? Is it too much fluid? Are they also right? I don't want to say hidden sources of fluid, but a lot of times on the opposite side, I'm asking players like during the summertime, hey, it's hot, increase your fruits and vegetables. If they're a player who's eating a lot of high water content fruits and vegetables, we could be a lot of extra fluid there that we're not accounting for just by the fluid that we're drinking. So, as a sports dietitian, that's where I'm going to dig. And that's exactly what I would do with that player. I'd be like, whoa, what exactly are we doing? And really dig in to be like, where are all of our sources coming from? And, what has your sweat rate been? And really digging into that. But there are people who get really hyper focused on hydration, or maybe they don't like the taste of like electrolyte supplements, or they just don't really, they're not like a salty, they don't really add salt to their foods. It has happened, and they get very hyponatremic, and there's issues, right? As you said, there's issues with that. So it can go either way. I unfortunately had an athlete over the summer. We had just started working together, and was doing golf during the day, hot, sweaty temperatures, and then would go to hockey and did this over and over and over. And they passed out on the ice, right? And this was due to dehydration. So that's the opposite end. So there are extremes. So I think that's why kind of understanding the full picture of like what all contributes, what your individual sweat rate is. Those are key things. And there's also sodium rates that we can look at as well, which is different than your sweat rate. If you have a high sweat rate, you could lose more sodium because you're just sweating more. But individual to individual, they've done research, and it's like you could have somebody, and this is even in endurance where they're sweating in hot, humid environments a lot. And one person loses 200 milligrams of sodium in like an hour, and the other person loses like 800 to 1,000. Individual rates of electrolyte loss they can be very drastic. So what one person does versus another isn't always going to be the same.
Is that widely available, the sweat rate test? Like, how do you go about that? I've not heard of like someone on their own going out and getting this done.
So sweat rate testing, I'll send you it's just an equation. It's just an equation, and it's making sure that so typically you'll have athletes come in. Well, I actually do it for teams. And like, I'll come in, I'll do all your sweat rate testing and all your calculations and give them a recommendation we usually do like in practice, because right, the different levels of intensity that you have. So in practice sweat rate testing versus game sweat rate testing, we usually do one of each. And I have done it over tournament weekends before too, because it's just the constant. So you weigh your players before, ideally in like minimum clothing, without their equipment on. Weigh them before. You're going to weigh their water bottle and whatever amount of fluid they intend. Like if it's full, you're going to weigh that. And then after they come off the ice, you're going to weigh them again. You're going to weigh that water bottle. You're going to do the difference of the weights and see how much they lost. And then I give a recommendation on, okay, you lost this much fluid in a training session. And sometimes we might do it a couple times just to make sure the average. And then I usually give them a kind of a goal range of what they need to rehydrate with. The sweat rate testing is a little more unique. You have to have a little bit more resources for that. But even Gatorade, a lot of the sports dietitians, we will utilize Gatorade. They have sweat rate patches that you put on the athlete's arms, and then we measure that when they come off the ice. So it's pulling out the amount of sodium and giving you a measurement so that you can kind of tell then the athlete, okay, in this session that was this long, this is how much sodium you lost. So then you can put those both together and say, okay, I would recommend for you this specific electrolyte drink, or this amount of sodium post practice to get you replated. So it's very customized. A little more scientific. Not as many of my youth groups go after that, but some of my teen and definitely my junior players go after that.
It's not bad to have quality information at hand.
Yeah.
Not at all. I always laugh because even like at the highest levels, there's a big difference. Like Bayern Munich's a world-class soccer organization, but for whatever reason, all of their athletes tend to like bulk up and get like noticeably bigger compared to a lot of other teams. And if you do some research into it, you're like, oh, they're super dialed in on strength training and nutrition to an extent that is wildly, even at the highest levels, um, more elite than you would
Hmm.
expect, whether it be out, yeah. I don't want to name names on other programs, but other areas where you see athletes that are maybe not bulking up as well and having that injury prevention. So, uh, really, really great to see there. I'm curious. Let's maybe go back to between periods, or what does this look like throughout an event?
Okay. So, especially when you hit the age when, right, we're getting those breaks between periods like the flood, then we have, I mean, depending upon how much time, maybe a max of 15 minutes, right, at the highest level, 10-ish, sometimes on the lower levels. Uh, it's got to be really quick fuel. So, we continue to hydrate, right? This is like the during. So, there are some depends. And that's why a lot of folks will say, well, what should I do? And a lot of people will blanket it and say, water during, water during. And I'm like, well, that depends. Depends on like, do we have multiple games in the day? If we do, or do we have multiple games in a back to back weekend, like Friday, Saturday, Sunday? How well was the athlete fueling earlier in the day? Did they hydrate well? Did they fuel well? Because that will determine like what type of fluid you're going to use in game. Uh, Water baseline, yes, that's great. But if you have a player who didn't fuel really well, maybe didn't do a pregame kind of top off snack, they actually might need something like a sports drink that has a 6 to 8% solution so that they can have a source of energy to continually grab from during the game. So, but during for teams that get that flood, that get that ice cut in between, then the really quick, you're probably looking at somewhere between something that has 10 to 15 grams of carbs. Here's a very basic recommendation that I give most of my athletes if they forget, like, I don't know how much to have or what to look at. One, we always do label reading so they know what to look at if they're looking at packaged products. But we always go with a general rule of like 1 gram of carb for every minute in between play. So if you've got 10 minutes, we want something with about 10 grams of carbs. So an applesauce pouch is probably anywhere from 10 to 15, depending upon the size of them. Some raisins. A lot of these players really like grabbing honey sticks, which are good, except you have to really look at the amount that's in there. I like honey stingers are probably best. They're a little bit bigger packet. And if you like the taste, um, it could be as simple as a handful of pretzels, about 15 grams of carbs. So something that is quick, fast, high carbohydrate, and is going to digest quickly so that you can get back on the ice and still feel very light and not feel weighed down by anything in your stomach. That is really the goal of right nutrition during is to keep you going and to keep that kind of topped off. So again, we're not digging down into those glycogen stores and completely depleting our muscles.
So, pickle juice and mustard. Where do these come into the equation? Because I see them all over the hockey rinks.
Yep. So there's been more research looking at specifically why, right? Um, and it actually comes down to like taste receptors in our mouth. It's interesting with sodium and carbohydrate. Because as soon as we taste it, it kind of sends a signal. Those are very salty foods, right? Um, Generally speaking, they don't contain too much carbohydrate, but they do contain a lot of salt. So for a lot of players, it's more on the line of like uh, making sure that we're maybe not cramping. I see some players who like, I want to make sure I don't cramp, or they have a history of cramping, so they'll use that. The biggest thing is it has sodium. It's a source of sodium. Also, there's a really interesting research study that was going into carbohydrate digestion. It starts in your mouth as well. And just even uh, players who were rinsing their mouths with a 6 to 8% carbohydrate solution, they were seeing delayed fatigue during overtime periods. It was really interesting. I'll have to send that to you.
So
But
not actually taking it, but just
not
simply
even
the
taking it,
tasting it.
just
Huh.
simply taking it. It sends, our brains are just wired for food, right? So it's that digestion starts in the mouth and it sends a signal immediately to our brains that, hey, it's coming. We've got a source of carbohydrate. We've got a source of sodium. Like, we're good. We can relax. But the ones who are actually taking it in, one, you're getting, if you're doing pickle juice, you're getting some fluid in there. So that's a bonus, right? But you are getting the sodium. There might be like traces of some carbohydrate in there. You'll get more if you actually eat the pickle, which actually, I have some players who enjoy having pickles, like the little vlasic pickles in there, because they are a source of carbohydrate. But that's really where that comes in, is it is more of like a receptor site that is signaling to our brain, hey, something is coming. But ideally, what you want to do is make sure that, you have to eat. I mean, I don't even know how many packets of mustard you'd have to eat to get 15 grams of carb. So I'd highly recommend, if you're trying to prevent cramping, I get that you're looking at the sodium, and that's probably where they're basing that off of. But if you're looking to actually provide some energy, we're going to need a little more carbohydrate with that. So something you can, maybe put some crackers, some mustard on your crackers. You're going to get a little more carbohydrate to actually give you that energy and ensure that you do have that energy in the third period.
Okay. Crackers. So we're gonna load up on crackers. All right. So we've looked before, during, now post game. So obviously we start with the hydration. Where do we go next? Like you hear about some coaches that recommend, start with a protein shake, at least get some hydration, some carbs, some proteins started. And then I've always heard like, okay, let's make sure we're getting a full meal here within 2 hours. What does this timeline look like? What does the requirements of the actual nutrition look like?
Yeah. I think for me, I always ask my players, like, what are your goals? And what does the schedule look like, right? If we have a heavy schedule of back-to-back games, or we have practice the evening before and then the next morning we've got an early game, we need to get in as much nutrition as we can. Most of the athletes that I work with in season, we're just trying to maintain weight. So for most of my athletes, I recommend we want to get in at least within an hour, 30 minutes to an hour, just some sort of snack to jumpstart the recovery process. This happens a little bit more when we're looking at like the weight training aspect for like muscle breakdown. But when you have such a high intensity sport like hockey, and the breakdown, and the demand that it requires from the muscles and to replete those glycogen stores, sort of for the hydration, but we also want to make sure, yes, we get in protein. Generally speaking, most people recommend somewhere around 20 grams, but it actually is based on individual body weight, but it's very easy for people to remember 20 grams of protein. So 20 grams is a good area to aim for, but we want to make sure we have 3 times the amount of carbohydrate, the right ratio because of recovery. Muscle or protein is to help us, right, rebuild the muscle, but you need the carbohydrate to replete those energy stores and allow that protein to go in and do what it's supposed to do, which is focus on the muscle rebuilding. And we don't, if we undereat on our carbohydrate, there is a risk, right, overall, that then the body is then trying to convert that protein to energy to use, and it's a higher metabolic demand, right, for us to convert protein, where our body knows it uses carbs. So we want to make sure we've got, like, if we do 20 grams of protein, we want 60 grams of carbs. So a really easy way to get that in. A lot of the players are like, I need something quick and fast, but doesn't have to be refrigerated. Some of the like core powers, they've got a good amount of protein in them, right? But they don't have enough carbohydrates. So I say throw a banana with that. Chocolate milk is a classic, highly studied. And it's just because it has a ratio of 3 to 1 carbohydrate to protein. and it's liquid. So you're getting a 3-in-1. That's why it works really well. And that's why so many sports dietitians recommend it. Uh, because you're going to get your fluid, you're going to get your carbohydrates to refuel, and you're going to get your protein to rebuild. But there's a million and different ways to do it. If I have people who are like, my kid's lactose intolerant, I can't have milk. I'm like, all right, so what are the things that we like? Some of them will do like a Chomps beef stick. It gets them about 10 grams of protein, and then we're going to add in about 30 grams of carbs. So they're going to have a banana, some pretzels, another piece of fruit, it just kind of depends on what's available. But I think that's the trickiest part is immediately after, it's got to be something that they can quickly have as they're walking out of the locker room, right? As they're finishing up there. You still want to, like, that doesn't do it though. Like, I do have some players who are like, well, I had a recovery thing and then I just didn't feel that hungry later. So I just didn't eat dinner. Okay. But we've got a game the next day. We've got practice the next day. We got to keep going. A snack immediately after isn't going to be enough. We do need to have a meal. And so within probably another 2 hours or so after we've had that recovery snack, then we want to try to sit down and have an actual performance plate meal, which again, for most of my players, it's half a plate of those complex carbs, lean, a fourth of lean protein, and a fourth of color.
All right. Um, a lot of good stuff here. From a very practical visualizing standpoint, what does 20 grams of protein look like to the layman?
Good question. So let me think here. If you
Like I feel like eggs for me is like the easiest way to think about it. Like how many eggs or hard-boiled eggs do I need?
Yeah. So, two, it depends, like if they're medium or large. So my that this is where my dietitian brain goes as well. It depends on what size they are. But on average, an average egg between a medium to a large size is going to have around 7 grams of protein in it. So if you do two, you're around 14. If you do three, you're around 21. But here's something that can be even simpler, like because like protein comes in so many different forms. We've got our lean, we got our dairy products, we have eggs, we have our lean meats. And those are all different sources of ways we can get protein. And then there's grains and things that have them as well. But those are like those primary, very high biologic availability. So our body can break them down pretty quickly and utilize them. So the size of a deck of playing cards, some of the kids look at me like, what the heck is that? Go with the palm of your hand is the best, one of the best ways to gauge. So that's going to be somewhere between probably 3 ounces, maybe closer to four. So you're looking at 21, 24 grams of protein. And, you know, you just kind of cut off your fingers, your thumb, and it's around the size of your palm. Why I love this is our hands grow as we get bigger, right? So as we grow into our adult sized bodies, we know we need a little more protein, right? So really using, and you have your hands with you all the time. So it's a really easy way for players to look down at a plate and be like, did I get enough protein? Or did, you know, that's the starting point because like I said, protein is going to be available in other areas of your plate. You know, your complex carbs, I mean, a potato, a medium-sized potato, 8 grams of protein. People don't realize this, but it's like you're getting protein from a variety of sources if you're building your plate properly.
So I feel like everyone asks the question of like, what do people get wrong about blank? So let's reverse this. What are people currently getting right? Like what should we continue to do?
Um, oh my gosh, that's such a good question. So what should we continue to do? We should continue to,
I'll start us off. We should continue to avoid fried foods.
yeah,
If it says crispy, it's fried. The entire or you know like, you never see fried blank. It's crispy blank. So fried or crispy, avoid that at all costs. We'll see where they evolve to next to try to deceive us all. But if you see crispy or fried, continue to avoid that. People are pretty good about that, I feel like nowadays, but let's continue to do that.
agreed. I've had too many players or stories of people come in and say that, you know, somebody vomited on the bench because they ate chicken wings before a game. So, agreed. Um, I would say continue to, I see more and more players putting a focus on like whole foods, which is great. Like, let's continue to put a focus on our whole foods and making sure that we're getting.
That is my favorite store. So, okay, we'll continue to shop there. Got it.
So whole food sources as much as possible. Um, let's see.
Like I was always a big grape person. I loved grapes. So, that was my during game, right or
Yeah,
wrong,
no,
snack.
grapes are great, and they're this because they also have that source of fluid in there. Um, I think continuing to use fruit. I see a lot of players who are like, I had a banana, I had fruit in between. Fruit's just a great source of carbohydrate. You're going to get more nutrients through that. So it's inevitable that you end up having to utilize some processed foods, especially in sports, especially for those who are traveling. What it comes down to is knowing how to navigate that and knowing like how to make good choices, right? Like you said, we're not going to pick the fried food. Maybe we pick a different restaurant. Maybe we look for like a sub shop instead of the fried restaurant, or maybe we look ahead to what's available and see, okay, where can we have just better access to food that's available during travel. But for some of the athletes, some of those processed foods, and it goes to show like the Olympics are coming up. Many Olympic athletes will tell you like the high level of training and things that they do. And you think about teen athletes, they're still growing. They have very high calorie needs. And sometimes we're going to have to utilize some of these processed foods because of one, the convenience and the availability of it. But it doesn't mean that that's your breakfast, lunch, and dinner, right? That means that they might fill in much like a supplement would, is how I kind of look at it. Because sometimes I have unfortunately run into the case where people are just scared to fuel if something is not labeled, quote unquote, clean. And that deterring them and causing them to underfuel and have low energy availability is way worse than them eating a package of processed peanut butter crackers. So,
Go ahead, eat the cherry pie. It won't kill you.
in moderation, right? In moderation. But it's like you have to have balance. Food is more than just, yes, it fuels our body. Yes, it's very simple, whole foods, but we live in a world that creates a lot more chaos around that and busy schedules and balancing all of that. And so we prioritize the whole foods at those meals first. And then you have to leave place for fun because if you don't, you will just not survive long term.
It's funny when you talk about fun. I think back to McDavid, everyone's favorite hockey player at the moment. But all of his teammates are like, he's like the cleanest eater. But if you bring any kind of like sugar type thing, candy around him, he will demolish it. So like clearly he's designed this life where he doesn't have that around. But when it is around, he's like, I can't resist.
Yeah. 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 And you got to find that balance. And I know a lot of players who really do a really good job of that. And I mean, that's going to take you through life. Like that's the biggest thing with nutrition, right? Yes, it can really aid your performance, especially the higher level you go. And for the youth athletes, it's so imperative just because their growth depends on it. So but making sure that we establish good habits that carry us through a lifetime because you can play hockey, with people can they can switch over, they can play the beer league, and they can keep doing that, but you gotta stay healthy, you gotta be able to still get out there and have a good immune system, be able to skate, so you still need to be able to perform at all different stages of life, whether you're playing competitive hockey now, whether you're coaching your kid later on.
Yeah, and I'll end this one because I think this has been fantastic, is to kind of like design your choices in your environment. Like for me, I love ice cream, but I don't buy it at the store because I know if I do, it's going to be gone within a few days. But if it's not around the house and I actually have to go get it, very less likely to just dive in every single night and grab a scoop or two or 10. Um, you know, or like pack the grapes, wash the grapes and pack them so it's there. So that's what I'm reaching for. So, how do you design your environment? How do you make the healthy choice or the quality choice for your fueling needs the easiest, most convenient choice? Because that's naturally where we're going to go. So, To your point, building those habits, building those routines. I'm going to just tack on building the environment, your environment, that leads to all these great, wonderful things that we've talked about, before, during, and after, to make sure we have our fueling needs not just at the very moment, but all day long, and also making sure that we're recovering well. Because if
Yeah,
you don't recover well, you're already starting from a deficit, and we all know. I mean, you don't need to dig ourselves into holes to begin with. But Val, this was wonderful. Glad that we could find quality time to get together and talk about something that's just such an underlying foundation of all performance.
absolutely. It's been a pleasure.
That concludes this week's episode. Thanks for joining us here at Hockey IQ. If you haven't already, take a quick moment to hit that subscribe button, give us a thumbs up, and drop a review. If you want to be a great teammate, even recommend us to a friend. You can follow us at Hockey's Arsenal on Twitter and Instagram. Check out the website, hockeysarsenal.com, where you can subscribe to the weekly newsletter. You won't regret it. Catch your buttes here next week for a brand new episode.